Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, tmosso@thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below. It is your purchase and pricing email question line for buying this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Please reach out to me directly. Email tmosso@thewatchbox.com for pricing details. Today we are discussing a watch that requires some explanation. This is the 2012 100-piece limited edition Panerai Radiomir 1940 PAM00398 Oro Rosso. Now, what's interesting here is that this was the first of the Radiomir 1940s, jointly with the similarly 100-piece and stainless steel PAM399. 399, 398, both 100 pieces, but 50 examples of each were made with identical serial numbers to be sold as a set, and collectively, those 50 pairs are known as the PAM784. So both of these are serial number 20 out of 100, and they are one example of the PAM784. We're going to sell them together. I'm making separate reviews for the models, but if you're watching this relatively close to the time the video is posted, keep in mind they're leaving together or not at all. We're keeping the 784 set together. All right, now let's talk about the 398. Oro Rosso is in some regards different from the 399. We'll talk about that in a moment, but let's talk about what's the same. 47mm case, this is the Radiomir 1940, and these two models collectively were the first of the modern Radiomir 1940 cases. So you still have the absence of the locking crown guard that would become characteristic of the 1950s Panerai 6152 combat watch, but we have a much more robust lug design than the 1930s 3646 combat watch, which featured rather slim welded-on wire-style lugs. So we have this more robust integrated lug profile, but no locking crown guard. Now, historically, the 6154 small Egyptian, the Egiziano 6154, would have been representative of this type of design, this transition between the first and ultimate Panerai combat watch designs. So 47 millimeters in diameter in red gold. It's actually thinner than you might expect. 15.2 millimeters thick, but broad. 56.9 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip, with a 26 millimeter spacing between the lugs. When you throw the watch on the wrist, well, big is the look. Too big is even the look with Panerai. You can see that there's some lug overlap, but the lugs, well, they're basically just there to drape the strap out. The case itself is a cushion, and it does not project beyond the end of my wrist. So it's okay to wear a Panerai watch that's a little bit too big for you. But if you want to be aesthetically matched wrist to case, I recommend you have a wrist of 17 centimeters circumference or larger. That said, being manual wind, the watch is thinner than expected, and with several different steps to the case flank, a dress cuff, at least a jacket, should easily ride up and over the side. This one's a bit more dressy than the steel 399, and let's talk about the reasons why. First, the 399 has a Ranger-style calfskin strap. This is large rectangular scale alligator leather in a lighter reddish-brown color. You can see it's bolstered to give it some volume, whereas the Ranger strap does not have any bolstering or stuffing. We still have the sort of off-white ecru contrasting stitch to match the fotina of the dial, but alligator leather here is a big qualitative upgrade over calfskin. Now, we also have a deployant clasp, whereas the Ranger strap on the 399 is paired with a simple steel pin buckle. So the 398 gets a full twin trigger actuated double folding clasp, and you can see that internally it has these pin snaps to keep the tolerances crisp over time. So you get a full folding clasp rather than the pin buckle of the 399. Now, rolling back, we have that charter member of the Radiomir 1940 family. This was the beginning of the modern watch called the Radiomir 1940. We do have this 1970s style OP logo on the crown, and although it's a screw-down crown and the case assembly is conventional modern Panerai in every regard, it's rated to 30 meters of water resistance, because that is approximately what the original combat watches would have been. So I do believe it's more than 30 meters, but just to be safe, there are better Panerai watches to take swimming, and what's inside this case is worth protecting. This is a rare Panerai that's actually about the movement. Now, other changes from the 399 to the 398, the dial. The 399 has a distinctly matte black dial, whereas the 398 has a sort of matte tobacco or chocolate dial, and it's easy to see. Rose gold hands, we have a stencil construction for this dial with a stencil over a loomed disc. This is what Panerai calls a sandwich dial. The stencil has the indices and the numerals. It sits on a solid disc of luminant material, and it makes for a sort of otherworldly depth effect when you're looking at the lume in the dark, and it is quite bright. And historically, back to the 1930s, this type of construction would have been used, not all the time, but occasionally, on Panerai watch construction from the true military era into the modern era of civilian watches. Now, when we flip it over, you can see why this edition was made in only 100 pieces. This is a Minerva-built movement. Minerva, out of Villeret, was purchased by Richemont in the 2000s and handed to the burgeoning Montblanc watchmaking operation as its sort of horlogerie arm. So super high-end movements finished to a high horology level in a few hundred copies per year. That's what Minerva was all about, or if they want to use the modern terminology, Montblanc Villeret. But here's the thing. What we've got here is a Minerva caliber 1617, a 37.52 millimeter diameter pocket watch caliber, much like the type of pocket watch caliber that would have powered the historic Panerai watches, which would have been either Rolex, Codebert, or Angelus. So this movement itself is larger in diameter than a standard 36mm Rolex Datejust, and it is beautifully decorated. We'll talk about that in a moment, but first, the tech and the spec. Panerai calls this caliber OP27, and it has a 55-hour manual wind power reserve. It has an enormous balance beating weight, only 18,000 vibrations per hour, and you can see it has a handmade overcoil hairspring, hand-shaped I should say, so that in any position it keeps very consistent time due to the centered mass of that type of hairspring. All of this pivots on 18 jewels, and it's beautifully decorated. You can see that the barrel itself sticks out almost to the pivot of the center wheel. It is solarized. The crown wheel core and the ratchet wheel are solarized. The wheels of the train are satinated with beveling inside. You could see that the beveling on these bridges, let me try to get this camera to focus on them, but the beveling here, it's not quite to the level of a Grubel Forcy or a Laurent Ferrier or a Romain Gaultier, but it's done to a level that would make Vacheron and Patek proud. We have abrasive wheel Côte de Genève laid down across the bridges, perfectly aligned. You can see the teeth of the ratchet wheel and the crown wheel have been mirror polished. We have this lovely black polished steel swan's neck fine adjustment mechanism, as well as a lovely satinated and beveled stud holder with a black polished regulator. Take a look now at these jewel sinks. They have been internally beveled, and you can really see well from this angle that these bevels are rounded, mirrored, and finished by hand. This is a type of finish you don't often see on Panerai watches. And you can see, I verify right here, that both of these watches are serial number 20 out of 100. This one's a little bit harder to see. But you can see serial number 20 of 100 here, O series. Easier to see on red gold, serial number 20 of 100. This watch is extraordinary, and the movement is extraordinary. Again, Minerva only makes a few hundred movements a year because when you're finishing things by hand and building them this beautifully, production will be low. Most of those movements go to Montblanc, but a handful go to other Richemont brands, and these two were among the fortunate few. Reach out to Team Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. One more quick note, because I know you're asking, both the 399 and the 398 feature plexiglass crystals, so you get that vintage style off-axis distortion. Both of them are identically plexied.